There comes a moment in every person's life when staying the same becomes more painful than changing, not because life suddenly gets harder, but because you finally see the gap between who you are and who you know you could be. This is not a speech about overnight success. This is about quiet decisions, daily discipline, and the courage to walk away from the version of yourself that no longer fits. If you want to become unrecognizable, you don't start by changing your appearance. You start by changing your why. Let's begin. Most people say they want change, but very few truly want what change demands. What they actually want is a better outcome without discomfort, growth without strain, and results without sacrifice. Comfort is seductive because it feels familiar. It feels like safety. It feels like control. Even when comfort keeps us stuck, it still feels better than the uncertainty of stepping into the unknown. That is why so many people stay exactly where they are, not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because comfort has convinced them that staying the same is safer than becoming more. Comfort never asks you to stretch. It never challenges your identity. It never forces you to question your habits or your beliefs. Comfort tells you that tomorrow will be different without requiring you to act differently today. And that lie is powerful. It keeps people waiting for motivation, waiting for the right moment, waiting for confidence to appear. But comfort never creates transformation. It only preserves what already exists. Every meaningful change in human history began when someone decided that their reason mattered more than their fear. Think about the individuals who reshaped industries, movements, or even their own lives. They didn't wake up one day fearless. They woke up convinced that what they were working toward was more important than what they were giving up. Fear didn't disappear, it simply lost its authority. Look at athletes who train before the sun rises. They are not driven by enjoyment. No one wakes up at 5 in the morning because it feels good to push an exhausted body into pain. They do it because the goal they are chasing, excellence, mastery, legacy, outweighs the discomfort of the moment. Their reason is stronger than their resistance. And because of that, discipline becomes automatic. Not easy, but automatic. The same principle applies to every area of life. People who transform their health do not rely on motivation to eat well or exercise. Motivation is inconsistent. It comes and goes with mood and energy. Instead, they rely on meaning. They connect their actions to something deeper. Being present for their children, avoiding a future filled with regret, proving to themselves that they can keep promises. When the reason is clear, the behavior follows, even on days when they feel tired, unmotivated, or discouraged. This is why the question that matters most is not, what do I want? Wanting is shallow. Wanting is easy. Everyone wants more money, better relationships, confidence, success. But wanting does not sustain effort. The real question is, why does it matter? Why does this change deserve your energy? Why is it worth your discomfort? Why is it worth saying no to old habits and yes to new ones? When you answer that honestly, you begin to see whether your desire is strong enough to survive difficulty. Many people avoid asking that question because it exposes the truth. Sometimes the reason isn't strong enough yet. Sometimes the pain of staying the same hasn't outweighed the pain of changing. And that's not a failure, it's awareness. Awareness is the beginning of growth. When people finally reach a breaking point, it's rarely because they suddenly discovered motivation. It's because their reason became unavoidable. Staying the same hurt more than moving forward. There is data that supports this idea. Behavioral psychology shows that people are far more likely to sustain change when it is tied to identity and purpose rather than external rewards. When someone sees themselves as the kind of person who does this, they no longer negotiate with discomfort. They act in alignment with who they believe they are becoming. That belief doesn't come from hype or inspiration. It comes from clarity. Think about moments in your own life when you followed through despite fear. You didn't do it because you felt confident. You did it because not doing it felt worse. The reason pulled you forward. That is the power you need to build if you want real transformation. Not surface level change, but the kind that rewires how you think, decide, and act. People often misunderstand discipline. They think disciplined people are somehow stronger, more motivated, or more gifted. In reality, disciplined people are simply clear about why they started, clear about what matters, clear about the cost of quitting. When clarity exists, discipline stops feeling like force and starts feeling like alignment. This is why vague goals fail. I want to be better is not a reason. I want success is not a reason. Those ideas are too abstract to guide behavior when things get hard. A reason has weight, it has emotion, it has personal meaning. It connects today's effort to tomorrow's identity. And once you find that reason, something shifts. You stop asking whether you feel like doing the work. You stop negotiating with excuses. You stop waiting for permission. The work becomes part of who you are, not something you try to do when conditions are perfect. You move even when it's uncomfortable because you understand what discomfort is buying. Comfort will always invite you back. It will remind you of how easy life was before you decided to grow. It will whisper that skipping one day doesn't matter, that lowering the standard is harmless, that you deserve a break. And sometimes rest is necessary, but quitting disguised as comfort destroys momentum. The difference is awareness. When your reason is strong, you can tell the difference. Becoming someone new does not start with changing your schedule, your habits, or your environment. It starts with deciding what matters enough to change for. When you anchor yourself to that reason, fear loses its control. Discomfort becomes temporary, and discipline stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like proof that you are moving in the right direction. This is how transformation actually begins. Not with motivation, not with inspiration, but with a reason bigger than comfort. You cannot build a new future while holding onto an old identity. Yet this is exactly what most people try to do. They want new results with familiar habits, higher standards without changing their self-image, and growth without loss. But transformation doesn't work that way. The life you want is built by a version of you that does not yet exist. And that means the version you are today must be willing to step aside. Letting go is uncomfortable because it feels like losing a part of yourself. Habits that once protected you, soothed you, or helped you survive don't disappear quietly. They resist. They remind you of who you used to be and try to convince you that staying the same is safer than changing. But comfort habits often outlive their usefulness. What once kept you stable can eventually keep you stuck. Growth demands the courage to release what no longer serves the direction you're heading. This applies not only to habits, but also to relationships. Some connections are formed in survival mode. Some relationships grow out of shared limitations rather than shared vision. When you begin to change, the distance you feel is not accidental. It is alignment shifting. Letting go of people who no longer match your values or direction doesn't mean you're ungrateful or disloyal. It means you are honest about who you are becoming. Not everyone is meant to go with you into your next chapter, and holding on to them out of guilt can slow your growth more than you realize. Excuses are often the hardest thing to release because they protect your ego. Excuses give you a story that allows you to stay comfortable without feeling irresponsible. They explain why now isn't the right time, why circumstances are unfair, why you're different. The problem is not that excuses are always false. The problem is that they keep you tied to the past. As long as you defend your limitations, you will never outgrow them. Research on behavioral change consistently shows that identity drives behavior. People do not act against how they see themselves for long. If you still identify as the person who procrastinates, avoids discomfort, or settles for less, your actions will eventually align with that identity. Even if you temporarily try to act differently, this is why change that focuses only on tactics fails. Real transformation begins when your self-image shifts. Think about how people speak when they are trying to change but haven't let go of their old identity. They say things like, "I'm trying to be more disciplined," or "I'm working on becoming confident." That language reveals hesitation. It keeps one foot in the past. Contrast that with someone who says, "I am the kind of person who follows through." Their actions may not be perfect yet, but their identity is already aligned with where they're going. To become unrecognizable, you must be willing to disappoint the old version of yourself. The version that preferred ease over effort. The version that found comfort in familiar patterns, even when those patterns limited growth. That version will resist change because it feels threatened. It will remind you of how much energy transformation requires. It will tell you that you're changing too much, that you're becoming someone you're not. But that voice is not wisdom, it's fear of the unknown. There is grief in growth, and that truth is rarely acknowledged. When you let go of an old identity, you grieve the person you once were. You grieve the routines, the relationships, the beliefs that felt safe. Even when growth is positive, loss is still loss. This is why growth feels heavy before it feels liberating. You are shedding a skin that once protected you, and until the new one forms, you feel exposed. But that exposure is temporary. What follows is clarity. When you release what no longer aligns, you create space. Space for new habits to take root. Space for healthier relationships. Space for decisions that reflect your future rather than your past. Freedom doesn't arrive the moment you let go, it arrives after you've stopped reaching back. Many people quit during this phase because they mistake discomfort for failure. They assume that feeling lost means they made the wrong choice. In reality, feeling lost is often a sign that the old map no longer applies. You are between identities. You are no longer who you were, but not yet fully who you're becoming. That space is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Every meaningful transformation passes through it. Consider people who have radically changed their lives, those who overcame addiction, rebuilt their careers, or reshaped their character. None of them did it by clinging to their old identity. They had to release not only behaviors, but also narratives. They stopped saying, "This is just how I am," and replaced it with, "This is who I choose to become." That shift changed how they responded to temptation, challenge, and pressure. Letting go does not mean erasing your past. It means refusing to let your past define your future. The experiences that shaped you still matter. The lessons remain, but they no longer get to dictate your limits. Growth requires discernment, the ability to recognize what belongs in your next chapter and what must stay behind. When you accept that growth requires letting go, you stop fighting the process, you stop negotiating with discomfort. You understand that the unease you feel is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of transition. And over time, what once felt like loss begins to feel like relief. You realize that you didn't lose yourself. You released a version of yourself that could only take you so far. And in doing so, you made room for someone stronger, clearer, and more aligned with the life you're building. People spend years waiting to feel ready. Ready to start. Ready to speak up, ready to change their habits, ready to become who they say they want to be. They tell themselves that confidence will come first, and once it does, action will follow naturally. But that sequence is backwards. Confidence is not the cause of action, it is the result of it. Waiting to feel confident before you begin is one of the most common reasons people stay stuck exactly where they are. Discipline is what comes before confidence. Discipline is the quiet decision to act even when uncertainty is present. It does not require belief in yourself. It requires a willingness to move despite doubt. Every time you take a disciplined action, no matter how small, you send a message to your brain, I do what I say I will do. That message may seem insignificant in the moment, but over time it becomes identity shaping. You begin to trust yourself, and that trust becomes the foundation of real confidence. Most people think confidence comes from winning or from praise or from external validation. But that kind of confidence is fragile. It disappears the moment things go wrong. Real confidence comes from self-trust. It comes from knowing that even when conditions are imperfect, you will show up. That belief cannot be faked. It is built through repetition, through keeping small promises to yourself when no one else is watching. This is why discipline feels uncomfortable at first. In the beginning, your brain does not believe you. It has seen broken promises before. It has experienced moments where you said you would start tomorrow and didn't. So when you begin to act differently, there is resistance. Doubt shows up, fatigue shows up, excuses show up. That resistance is not a sign that something is wrong. It is evidence that something is changing. Your brain is recalibrating to a new pattern. Scientific research on habit formation confirms this process. Studies show that small, consistent actions rewire neural pathways far more effectively than sporadic bursts of effort. 5 minutes every day does more to change behavior than 5 hours once a month because consistency builds reliability. Reliability builds identity. Identity drives behavior. When your brain sees consistency, it starts to believe the story you are telling it through your actions. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They aim for intensity instead of consistency. They wait for the perfect surge of motivation and then try to overhaul their entire life in one dramatic push. When that intensity fades, as it always does, they interpret the slowdown as failure. In reality, the problem was never their ability, it was their strategy. Sustainable growth is quiet. It is repetitive, is built on showing up even when enthusiasm is low. Discipline does not mean pushing yourself relentlessly. It means removing the need to debate with yourself. When an action becomes part of your routine, it no longer drains mental energy. You don't ask whether you feel like doing it, you do it because that is who you are. This is why disciplined people appear confident. They are not constantly questioning themselves. They have already decided. You do not need to feel ready to act. Readiness is an illusion created by fear. It suggests that one day you will wake up without doubt, without resistance, without uncertainty. That day never comes. Everyone who has ever achieved something meaningful began before they felt ready. They began while still unsure, still imperfect, still learning. Readiness is built by starting, not by waiting. There are countless real-life examples that illustrate this truth. People who commit to a daily walk often start with no belief that it will change anything. But after weeks of showing up, something shifts, their energy improves, their self-respect grows. They begin to see themselves as someone who takes care of their body. That identity then influences other choices, what they eat, how they sleep, how they manage stress. It all starts with a small act of discipline, not a sudden wave of confidence. The same applies to learning new skills, building a business, or improving relationships. People who wait to feel skilled before practicing never gain skill. People who practice while feeling awkward and unprepared eventually become competent. Confidence arrives quietly, almost unnoticed as a byproduct of consistency. Discipline also changes how you respond to setbacks. When you rely on motivation, a bad day can derail you completely. When you rely on discipline, a bad day becomes part of the process. You don't quit because you miss a step. You adjust and continue. That resilience is not personality-based. It is built through repeated follow-through. Every disciplined action is a vote for the person you are becoming. Each time you show up, you reinforce the belief that you can be trusted. Over time, that belief becomes internalized. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries and start seeing yourself as someone who does. That shift is subtle but powerful. It changes how you make decisions, how you handle pressure, how you view challenges. Many people underestimate how much self-trust matters. When you don't trust yourself, every decision feels heavy. You overthink, you hesitate, you seek reassurance. When you trust yourself, decisions become simpler. You move forward with clarity because you know you will handle whatever comes next. That trust is not gifted, it is earned through discipline. Showing up does not mean perfection, it means presence. It means doing what you can with what you have consistently. Some days the effort will be strong, other days it will be minimal. What matters is that you return. Each return strengthens the habit. Each habit strengthens identity. You don't need a dramatic breakthrough to begin. You need a small commitment and the willingness to honor it. The discipline you build today becomes the confidence you rely on tomorrow. And the confidence you build becomes the life you once believed you weren't ready for. Most people don't quit because they fail. They quit because of what failure makes them believe about themselves. They interpret a setback as a verdict on their ability, their intelligence, or their worth. One mistake becomes proof that they're not cut out for this. One rejection becomes evidence that they should stop trying. In reality, failure itself is rarely the real problem. The meaning we attach to it is. Failure is not a final judgment. It does not define who you are or what you're capable of. Failure is information, is feedback about what worked, what didn't, and what needs to change. When you remove emotion from the experience and examine it honestly, failure becomes one of the most valuable tools for growth. But that shift requires maturity. It requires the willingness to see yourself as a work in progress rather than a finished product. The people we admire most didn't succeed because they avoided failure. They succeeded because they learned from it faster than others. Behind every visible success is a long trail of invisible mistakes, wrong turns, and experiments that didn't work. The difference is that they didn't stop when things got uncomfortable. They stayed long enough to learn. They treated setbacks as part of the process, not a signal to quit. In innovation, this mindset is well documented. Companies that succeed over the long term don't punish failure, they study it. They analyze what went wrong and adjust. In psychology, this is known as a growth-oriented approach. When people see failure as feedback, they remain engaged. When they see it as a personal flaw, they withdraw. The outcome isn't determined by the failure itself, but by the response to it. Every setback contains information. A missed goal tells you something about your strategy. A rejection tells you something about alignment. A delay tells you something about timing or preparation. None of these experiences are wasted unless you refuse to learn from them. When you extract the lesson, the failure has served its purpose. The challenge is that learning from failure requires humility. It means admitting that your approach may need adjustment. It means acknowledging gaps in skill or preparation without turning that acknowledgement into self-judgment. This is where many people struggle. They confuse responsibility with self-blame. Responsibility says, what can I do differently next time? Self-blame says, this happened because I'm not enough. One leads to growth. The other leads to stagnation. Discomfort often arrives before clarity. When something doesn't work, the immediate reaction is frustration. You feel exposed, you feel behind, you feel tempted to retreat to what's familiar. But if you stay with the discomfort long enough, insight follows. You begin to see patterns. You notice where your assumptions were wrong. You recognize what needs strengthening. That insight is the reward for endurance. Think about learning any complex skill. At first, mistakes are constant. Progress feels slow. Improvement is hard to see. If you interpret every error as a sign that you lack talent, you quit early. If you interpret errors as part of the learning curve, you improve steadily. Over time, the very mistakes that once discouraged you become the foundation of your competence. This is true in relationships, careers, health, and personal development. People who succeed in these areas are not those who avoid conflict, missteps, or disappointment. They are those who remain engaged when things don't go as planned. They adjust instead of abandoning. They reflect instead of retreating. Every delay is preparation, even when it doesn't feel like it. Time spent waiting is often time spent learning patience, resilience, or clarity. Some lessons cannot be rushed. Some growth only happens when you're forced to slow down. What feels like a pause is sometimes an opportunity to refine your direction before moving forward. Quitting too early robs you of that opportunity. When you stop at the first sign of discomfort, you never allow the process to shape you. You never give yourself time to evolve. You stay defined by your initial limitations rather than your long-term potential. Growth requires staying in the process long enough for feedback to turn into wisdom. There is also an emotional component to failure that cannot be ignored. Failure can trigger shame, especially in cultures that equate success with worth. When success is tied to identity, failure feels personal. But separating who you are from what you are learning is essential. You are not your outcomes. You are the one interpreting and responding to them. Resilient people develop the ability to observe failure without becoming consumed by it. They ask better questions. Instead of, why did this happen to me? They ask, what is this teaching me? Instead of, should I stop? They ask, how should I adapt? Those questions keep them moving forward. This shift in perspective does not happen overnight. It is built through repeated exposure to discomfort and a conscious choice to remain curious rather than critical. Each time you respond to failure with reflection instead of withdrawal, you strengthen your ability to handle future challenges. Over time, what once felt threatening begins to feel manageable. When you redefine failure as feedback, you stop fearing it. You understand that it is not the opposite of success, but a necessary part of it. You stop trying to protect your ego and start investing in your growth. That change alone can transform how far you are willing to go. If you quit every time it's uncomfortable, you never give yourself the chance to discover what lies on the other side of that discomfort. But if you stay, learn, and adjust, failure becomes less of an obstacle and more of a guide. And with each lesson learned, you move closer to the person you are capable of becoming. People often believe that success is a matter of willpower. They think that if they just try harder, stay stronger, and resist temptation long enough, they will eventually become the person they want to be. But willpower is fragile. It gets exhausted. It fades under stress. It weakens when life becomes overwhelming. Relying on willpower alone is one of the most unreliable strategies for lasting change. Environment, on the other hand, is constant. It shapes behavior quietly and consistently. Long before you make a conscious decision, your surroundings have already influenced what feels normal, acceptable, and expected. This is why environment matters more than motivation. You don't need extraordinary strength to grow if your environment supports growth. And you don't need extraordinary weakness to fall back into old patterns if your environment pulls you there. If you surround yourself with people who normalize excuses, excuses will feel reasonable. When everyone around you justifies procrastination, avoids responsibility, or dismisses discipline as unnecessary, it becomes harder to act differently. Even if you want to improve, the social cost of standing apart can feel heavy. Over time, you begin to mirror what you see, not because you lack ambition, but because humans are wired to belong. Conversely, when you surround yourself with people who live by standards, discipline becomes natural. Standards raise the baseline of behavior. They redefine what is normal. In an environment where effort is expected, showing up becomes easier. Not because the work is less demanding, but because the culture supports it. You begin to rise simply by being present. Psychological research strongly supports this idea. Studies on social influence and habit formation show that behavior is heavily affected by proximity and repetition. We adopt the habits, language, and attitudes of those we spend the most time with. This influence happens even when we believe we are independent thinkers. The brain is constantly scanning for cues about what is safe, acceptable, and rewarded. This principle extends beyond people to physical spaces and routines. Your environment includes what you see when you wake up, what you have easy access to, and what requires effort. If distractions are within reach and productive tools are hidden, your behavior will reflect that. If healthy choices are visible and unhealthy ones require extra effort, your behavior shifts almost automatically. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your environment. When pressure increases, you don't suddenly become more disciplined. You revert to what is familiar. That is why stressful moments often undo progress. They don't reveal weakness. They reveal systems that were never designed to support growth under strain. Designing your environment is an act of self-respect. It is acknowledging that you are human, not perfect. It means removing unnecessary friction from positive behaviors and adding friction to negative ones. This might look like changing who you spend time with, restructuring your schedule, or altering your physical space. These changes may seem small, but their impact compounds over time. Consider how people successfully change their health. Those who rely on willpower struggle daily with temptation. Those who redesign their environment by keeping healthy food accessible, planning meals, or removing triggers make better choices with less effort. The goal is not to fight temptation constantly, but to reduce how often it appears. The same logic applies to mindset. If you constantly consume negativity, criticism, or cynicism, it will shape how you think. If you regularly expose yourself to growth-oriented conversations and examples of discipline, your perspective expands. You begin to expect more from yourself, not because you are forcing it, but because that expectation becomes normal. Changing your environment can be uncomfortable, especially when it involves distancing yourself from familiar people or places. It can feel like rejection or betrayal, but in reality, it is alignment. You are choosing to place yourself in contexts that support who you are becoming. Not everyone will understand that choice, and that's part of the process. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone who doesn't share your goals. It means being intentional about influence. It means recognizing which environments pull you forward and which pull you back. It means spending more time where growth is encouraged and less time where stagnation is accepted. Environment also includes the standards you tolerate. What you allow repeatedly becomes your norm. When you tolerate chaos, disorganization, or low expectations, they define your baseline. When you raise your standards, your environment changes with them. Discipline becomes less about effort and more about consistency within a supportive structure. People who appear highly disciplined often aren't fighting constant battles with themselves. They've simply designed lives where the right choices are easier. They've removed unnecessary distractions. They've built routines that reduce decision fatigue. They've chosen environments that reinforce their values. This is not manipulation, it is wisdom. It is understanding human behavior and working with it rather than against it. When you stop relying on willpower and start designing your surroundings, progress becomes more sustainable. Designing your environment is also an ongoing process. As you grow, your needs change. What once supported you may no longer be enough. Regularly reassessing your surroundings ensures that they continue to align with your direction. This requires honesty and courage, but it pays off in clarity and momentum. When your environment supports your goals, growth feels less like a struggle and more like a natural progression. You still work hard, but you are no longer fighting uphill every day. You move forward with fewer obstacles because you have intentionally removed them. Ultimately, your surroundings will shape you whether you choose them or not. By designing your environment intentionally, you take control of that influence. You stop leaving your growth to chance and start building conditions that support the person you are becoming, not the person you were. In a world that rewards visibility, it feels natural to announce every intention. We are encouraged to share our goals, our plans, and our next moves before they have even taken shape. It feels productive to talk about what we are going to do. It feels validating to receive encouragement and approval. But transformation does not require an audience. In fact, too much attention too early can quietly sabotage progress. When you announce your plans before you've done the work, your brain often mistakes the praise for progress. Psychological research shows that talking about goals can release dopamine, the same chemical associated with achievement. The problem is that your mind doesn't always distinguish between talking about the work and doing the work. The emotional reward arrives early, and the urgency to follow through weakens. Momentum fades not because the goal wasn't important, But because the satisfaction came too soon, quiet progress protects focus. When no one is watching, there is no pressure to perform for approval. You are free to struggle, adjust, and grow without explaining yourself. Silence gives you room to experiment without judgment. It allows you to build strength before exposure. This is how real discipline is formed, away from applause, away from comparison, away from distraction. There is strength in unseen discipline. Waking up early when no one knows, working on yourself when no one is clapping, choosing consistency when there is no recognition. These moments build character because they are driven by internal standards, not external validation. When your actions are guided by who you want to become rather than you want others to see, your growth becomes more authentic and more durable. The strongest moves are often made quietly. History is full of people who spent years preparing before anyone noticed their impact. Their preparation wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. They invested in skills, habits, and resilience long before results appeared. When success finally arrived, it seemed sudden to others, but it was anything but sudden. It was the outcome of long, silent commitment. Silence also protects you from unnecessary opinions. When you share plans too early, you invite advice, doubt, and distraction. Not all feedback is helpful, especially in the fragile early stages of growth. Other people's fears can become your hesitation if you let them. Staying silent allows you to move forward without carrying the weight of expectations that don't belong to you. This does not mean isolating yourself or rejecting support. It means being selective. It means sharing progress with those who understand the process, not those who need to approve of it. Silence is not secrecy, it is strategy. It is choosing to prioritize execution over explanation. There is a temptation to explain yourself when your behavior changes. When you stop showing up the same way, people notice, they ask questions, they want reassurance that you are still familiar, still predictable. Explaining too much can pull you back into old patterns. Silence allows you to change without negotiating your growth. Unseen discipline also builds self-trust. When you show up for yourself consistently without external validation, you strengthen your internal compass. You begin to rely less on praise and more on progress. That shift is powerful. It makes you less reactive and more resilient. You become grounded in your own standards. Quiet progress also reduces comparison. When you focus on your work instead of broadcasting it, you spend less time measuring yourself against others. You move at your own pace. You allow your journey to unfold without rushing to match someone else's timeline. That patience is rare, and it is an advantage. When people finally notice the change, let them be surprised. Let your results speak for you. Surprise is powerful because it reveals authenticity. It shows that your growth was not performative, it was real. People trust results more than explanations. They respect consistency more than announcements. Silence also teaches you to find fulfillment in the work itself. When the work is the reward, progress becomes sustainable. You stop chasing recognition and start building mastery. This internal satisfaction fuels long-term growth far more effectively than external applause ever could. Staying silent while you build does not mean hiding your light. It means allowing it to grow strong enough to shine on its own. It means understanding that visibility without substance is fragile, but substance without visibility is powerful. When the time comes to step forward, you won't need to convince anyone of who you've become. Your actions will already have done that work. And until then, you continue quietly, deliberately, and confidently building a version of yourself that no longer needs validation to move forward. Perfection is seductive. It promises control, certainty, and approval. It tells you that if you can just get everything right, you'll finally feel confident enough to move forward. But perfection is a trap. It delays action, fools self-criticism, and convinces people that anything less than flawless is failure. Consistency, on the other hand, is a weapon. It doesn't require brilliance or ideal conditions. It only requires commitment to return again and again, regardless of how it feels. Most people don't fail because they lack talent, intelligence, or potential. They fail because they cannot sustain effort. They start strong, full of motivation, and then disappear when things become repetitive, uncomfortable, or slow. Progress is rarely dramatic. It is quiet and incremental. Without consistency, even the most gifted individuals stall. With consistency, even average effort compounds into extraordinary results. The new version of you is not built in one defining moment. It is built in thousands of ordinary days where you make small choices that align with who you are becoming. These days rarely feel important. They don't come with applause or visible breakthroughs, but they are the foundation. Each day you choose effort over excuses, you reinforce a pattern. Over time, that pattern becomes identity. Perfection demands that you perform at your best every time. Consistency only asks that you show up. This difference matters because showing up is always within reach. There will be days when your energy is low, your confidence is shaky, and your motivation is absent. On those days, perfection tells you to wait. Consistency tells you to act anyway. That action may be smaller, slower, or imperfect, but it counts. Missing a day does not erase progress. Quitting does. The problem is not the missed day, it is the story you tell yourself afterward. Many people turn a single lapse into a reason to stop entirely. They see the imperfection as evidence that they are not disciplined enough. In reality, consistency is not about never missing, it is about always returning. Making mistakes is part of the process. Mistakes provide feedback. They reveal what needs adjustment. When you respond to mistakes with curiosity rather than criticism, You stay engaged. You adapt instead of abandoning the effort. This mindset keeps you moving forward even when the path isn't smooth. Feeling tired is inevitable. Life demands energy from many directions. Waiting to feel energized before acting is another form of perfectionism. Consistency acknowledges fatigue but does not surrender to it. Showing up on tired days builds resilience. It teaches you that you can function even when conditions are not ideal. That lesson is invaluable. Consistency changes identity because it changes self-perception. Each time you show up, you reinforce the belief that you are reliable. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through. This belief influences future decisions. You stop debating whether to act and start acting because that is who you are. This identity shift is subtle but profound. It doesn't happen after one perfect performance. It happens after repeated imperfect efforts. Over time, the accumulation of these as efforts rewires how you think about yourself. Confidence grows not from success, but from self-trust. Consistency also reduces emotional volatility. When your progress depends on mood, you ride a constant wave of highs and lows. When progress depends on habit, you become steadier. You don't overreact to setbacks or over-celebrate wins. You focus on the process. This emotional stability allows you to persist longer. In creative work, physical training, learning, and leadership, consistency is the common denominator of mastery. People who achieve long-term success are not those who produce one brilliant moment, but those who keep producing over time. Their work improves because they stay in the game long enough to refine it. There is humility in consistency. It accepts that growth takes time. It respects the process. It values progress over perfection. This humility keeps you grounded and open to learning. Consistency also builds momentum. Each action makes the next one easier. What starts as effort becomes routine. What once required discipline becomes habit. Eventually, not showing up feels more uncomfortable than showing up. That is when consistency has truly taken hold. Perfection isolates. It makes you feel alone in your struggles because you believe you are the only one falling short. Consistency connects you to the reality of growth. Everyone struggles, everyone adjusts, everyone has days where effort feels heavy. What separates those who progress from those who don't is the decision to continue. Over time, consistency creates results that look impressive from the outside. People may call it discipline or talent or luck. They rarely see the thousands of ordinary days that built it. They see the outcome, not the accumulation. Consistency is not glamorous. It doesn't announce itself, but it is powerful. It shapes identity quietly and reliably. When you commit to consistency over perfection, you give yourself permission to grow. And that permission is often the difference between staying where you are and becoming who you are capable of being. The most powerful change you will ever make is not in what you do, but in who you decide to become. For most of their lives, people ask the wrong question. They ask, what should I do next? They look for tactics, strategies, and instructions. They search for the perfect plan, hoping that the right action will finally fix everything. But actions without identity are fragile. They collapse under pressure. The real shift happens when you stop focusing on behavior alone and start focusing on the person behind the behavior. When you ask, who am I becoming? Everything changes. Decisions become simpler. Choices become clearer. You are no longer negotiating every action in isolation. Instead, you are acting in alignment with an identity you have chosen. Your behavior begins to follow your self-image because behavior always follows identity. This is not philosophy, it is human nature. People consistently act in ways that reinforce how they see themselves. If you decide you are disciplined, you don't debate whether to do the work. You do it because that is what disciplined people do. The question is no longer, do I feel like this today? The question becomes irrelevant. Identity removes friction. It reduces decision fatigue. It turns effort into expression rather than obligation. If you decide you are resilient, setbacks stop defining you. You still feel disappointment. You still experience frustration, but you don't interpret those moments as signals to quit. You endure because endurance is part of who you are. Resilient people don't avoid hardship. They move through it. When resilience becomes identity, persistence feels natural. If you decide you are focused, distractions lose their power. Focus is not about eliminating distractions from the world. It's about deciding what deserves your attention. When your identity is clear, distractions become less tempting because they don't align with who you are becoming. You don't need to constantly resist, you simply choose differently. Many people struggle because their identity is inherited rather than chosen. They live according to labels they accepted years ago, labels shaped by past experiences, failures, or other people's opinions. They tell themselves, I'm just not disciplined, or I've never been confident, or that's just how I am. These statements feel factual, but they are actually choices repeated so often that they feel permanent. Identity is not fixed. It is reinforced. Every action you take is a vote for the person you are becoming. Even small actions matter because they signal direction. When you consistently act in alignment with a chosen identity, that identity becomes stronger. Over time, it feels natural. What once felt forced becomes familiar. This is why change that focuses only on outcomes rarely lasts. Outcomes are external, identity is internal. When your identity shifts, outcomes follow as a byproduct. You don't chase results, you embody the behaviors that produce them. This approach is quieter, slower, and far more sustainable. Deciding who you are becoming also changes how you handle temptation. When temptation arises, you don't ask, can I get away with this? You ask, is this who I am? That question carries weight. It appeals to integrity rather than willpower. It makes choices personal, not just practical. This shift also frees you from the need to prove anything to others. When your motivation comes from external validation, you become reactive. You chase approval. You adjust your behavior to match expectations. But when your motivation comes from a promise to yourself, you become grounded. You move with intention rather than insecurity. Becoming unrecognizable is not about impressing people or rewriting your image. It is about alignment. It is about closing the gap between who you say you want to be and how you live each day. That alignment creates peace. It reduces internal conflict. You no longer feel like you are performing, you feel like you are becoming. Keeping a promise to yourself is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect. Each time you honor that promise, you strengthen your identity. Each time you break it, you weaken trust. This is why small promises matter. They are not small to your brain. They shape how you see yourself. The process is not dramatic. It does not require a public declaration or a defining moment. It requires quiet decisions made consistently. Choosing discipline when it would be easier to quit. Choosing focus when distraction is tempting. Choosing resilience when giving up would bring relief. Over time, these choices accumulate. People begin to notice the change. They may call it growth or confidence or transformation. What they are really seeing is alignment between identity and action. You are no longer trying to become someone else. You are acting as the person you decided to be. When you decide who you are becoming and act accordingly, life simplifies. You stop chasing every opportunity and start honoring your direction. You stop reacting to circumstances and start responding with intention. You stop waiting for permission and start living in alignment with your values. This is the final shift. Not changing what you do, but changing who you are. And when that decision is made and reinforced daily, becoming unrecognizable is no longer a goal. It becomes a natural outcome of keeping a promise to yourself. One day, people will say, "You've changed," and you'll know the truth. You didn't change overnight. You changed quietly, deliberately, relentlessly. You became unrecognizable, not because you lost yourself, but because you finally became who you were meant to be.